I welcome you all to the module 12 of this course. So, this is the last module and this is the second lecture of this module and overall it is lecture number 29. So, basically in this module we are talking about some specific applications of personality psychology. So, in that context we discussed in the first lecture of this module we talked about how personality is connected to physical health. In today's lecture we will be talking about how personality can be applied or is connected to the concept of mental health. So, before we talk about today's lecture, let me give you a brief recap of the last lecture. So, as I have already said that in the last lecture we talked about how personality is connected to the physical health or how it influences physical health. So, we discussed various possible mechanisms, more specifically 4 possible mechanisms by which personality is connected to physical illnesses, which includes things like personality traits could influence your physiological reaction patterns and that can ultimately lead to various physical diseases, and there can be through behavioral mechanisms also. We also discussed how personality traits are related to both healthy behaviors as well as unhealthy behaviors, which ultimately contribute to our health. We also discussed one specific trait of personality, which is conscientiousness, which includes things like behavior which is disciplined, organized, goal oriented behavior. These are the traits associated with conscientiousness, and more specifically this trait has been found to be very strongly connected to health promoting behaviors, and ultimately it promotes health as well as longevity. In the end we discussed type A and type B personality, and we discussed their traits and characteristics, and we tried to understand how type A is connected to cardiovascular diseases. So, these are some of the things that we discussed in the last lecture. In today's lecture we will be talking about more specifically how personality makes people more vulnerable to mental disorders. We will be talking more specifically the details of some of the personality disorders itself. So, there can be many disorders which are directly related to the personality factors, and we will at the end see the causes of personality disorders. So, let us see these concepts in detail. So, when we talk about personality concepts and theories, it has a significant applications in the clinical psychology, where the focus is more on understanding disorders, treatment of disorder, assessment of disorders, and personality has a lot of application in the field of clinical psychology. So, clinical psychologists are concerned with personality because many mental disorders can only be understood within the context of traits and personality processes of those affected. Because without understanding the personality traits and characteristics of the person, we may not be able to look for particular more specifically about the treatment of the people. So, mental disorders has to be understood from the perspective of personality traits also, because then only we can understand the proper treatment as a process of the person. So, certain personality characteristics may increase the risk of particular disorders and influence individuals' reaction to stressful life events. This we have discussed in the last lecture in detail also, that certain traits makes people more vulnerable to experience stress, experience the anxieties and stress or the negative emotional states, which could make this person more vulnerable for both physical disorders as well as mental disorders. So, this trait can also affect how mental disorders are expressed and have implications for treatment approaches. Okay. So, understanding this trait is very important in the context of understanding the symptoms of the personality disorder, the mental disorders, as well as it has a lot of implication in terms of how the treatment has to be done. Additionally, some personality traits or when expressed extremely may be considered mental disorder themselves. So, many times certain problematic behaviors are associated with the personality itself. So, that those expression could directly be called as disorders. So, these are called personality disorders, which we will be talking about in this lecture also. So, why personality should be studied in the context of mental disorder? One of the main reason is that personality itself can become a very important vulnerability factors for mental disorders. So, many personality traits can make people more vulnerable or more prone to many psychological disorders. So, many risks. So, mental disorder can have many risk factors which could contribute to mental disorders, which may include things like even some demographic variables like gender, social class, race and age. So, all these factors also can make people vulnerable. For example, females could be more vulnerable for depression as compared to males. So, like this many demographic factors could kind of make people vulnerable. Some mental disorders are more likely to happen to certain person because of the genetic vulnerabilities, because there are certain factors in the gene itself that makes people more vulnerable towards certain disorders. Sometimes cultural characteristics such as shared beliefs about expressing distress, how culture can shape how people, to what extent people accept expression of certain disorders, how a disorder is expressed and how treatments are done. Lot of these factors could be culturally determined. So, culture could also sometimes influence how people experience something, how they express certain disorders or as symptoms of disorders. Life events can always, like traumatic and stressful factors, can make people more vulnerable towards certain disorders. Social relationship aspects like marital difficulties and lack of social support, all this could also make people more vulnerable for psychological disorders. So, mental disorders has many factors which could contribute to the progress or in the first step place stimulation of such disorder. Among all these factors, there is also some personality factors could be one of the another factors or vulnerability factors which could contribute to mental disorders. So, certain personality characteristics have been shown to make individual prone to specific mental disorder. So, certain disorders can be linked to certain personality characteristics which basically makes them vulnerable towards certain disorders. So, in psychology, such vulnerability factors or which makes people more prone towards certain disorders are called diathesis, which means certain predispositional factors which is within the individuals. So, those are called diathesis factors. Certain factors which are inside the individuals which makes them more vulnerable towards certain disorders. So, identifying these factors are very important for research in personality and clinical psychology. So, one of such factors is personality factors. Now, let us see how personality can be linked to mental disorders. We will take more specifically the case of depression, that how personality is linked to or could make people more prone towards mental disorders such as depression. So, depression, I know there are many categories to it. Most prominent is the major depression, which is recognized by mental health professional as a serious emotional disturbance affecting significant population, significant number of population. So, it is mostly disturbances in the emotion. Mostly people who are suffering from depression experience wide range of symptoms, including sad mood, loss of interest and pleasures in life, daily activities, insomnia, lack of sleep, difficulty concentrating, making decisions, loss of appetite, weight loss, fatigue, feelings of guilt, intense self-critical and hopeless thinking. So, these are some of the kind of cluster of symptoms that are generally visible in the patients of depression. So, mostly people lose interest and the pleasures in the daily activities of life. They may also become very pessimistic and so on. So, there are many expression of major depression. The episode of depressions often last, it could last for months. Sometimes it can reoccur again in the person's life, can lead to many severe complications such as increased risk of suicidal tendencies, relationship problems, marital problems, occupational difficulties, health related issues, substance abuse. So many other host or clusters of other symptoms could come along with the depression. These are all manifestation of this mindset of or mental experiences of depression. Now, people may become vulnerable to depression for various reasons. People can, why somebody become depressed? There could be many reasons. It could be even related to being certain gender. For example, as I said, females are more vulnerable for depression because of for whatever reason. It could be because of certain family history, past and present life stresses that the person is experiencing, relationship issues, and all this could contribute to the depression. So, there could be many reasons towards why a person experiences depression. It could have also genetic reasons also. Now, psychologists, apart from all these vulnerability factors, also found that sometimes certain personality characteristics or people with certain traits are also at more that increases, those trait increases the risk of developing a major depression. Some of these things are people with certain traits like too much of self criticism and with certain explanatory style they have, how they explain things that happens in their life, particularly positive things or negative things, success and failures, how they explain those factors in their life, what is the style of their explanation could also contribute to depression. So, we will see some of these factors. So, these factors are connected to the personality trait, how a person perceives the world, how a person views the world, how a person interprets the things that happens in their life. So, we will see, let us see some of these factors. So, these factors are connected to the concept of personality, it is an expression of traits. So, one is self criticism, which could be a trait of certain person, which could make people more vulnerable towards depression. So, self criticism is basically is a dimension of personality which could make people prone to depression. Many researchers argue that some individuals are particularly prone to punishing self evaluations. They all the time criticize themselves, holding themselves for unreasonably high and perfectionist standards. So, self criticism, realistic self criticism is fine when you are not able to perform something, or you do the realistic assessment and try to set goals and try to improve, that is fine. Now, here the self criticism is kind of becomes more irrational, more unreasonable, and people sometimes have a perfectionist standard which is almost impossible to attain. And then if they are not able to attain that, they keep criticizing themselves, punishing themselves with lot of evaluation, negative evaluation about themselves. So, people with self criticism, this trait, they are more likely to not be happy and satisfied with themselves, which goes to an irrational level. So, some rational, certain level, certain realistic aspect of self criticism is fine, but when it becomes too much and too irrational, then it can lead to problematic patterns of behavior. Many psychoanalytic researchers from the tradition of Freudian perspective describe these individuals are suffering from harsh superego. So, we have discussed the Freudian theory earlier, where we discussed what is superego. It is mostly basically the moral aspects of one's personality, through which you judge what is good and bad, what is right and wrong. So, that is the called superego part. So, basically according to psychoanalysis, people with lot of self criticism actually are those individuals who has very strong superego many times. Such individuals are vulnerable to guilt, shame, self reproach in their everyday lives, and significant negative events for which they feel responsible and lead to many times clinical depression. So, because of this approach, they are more likely to go into depression. So, when people are depressed, highly self critical people are likely to experience severe of an irrational guilt. So, they are also more likely to experience guilt which is irrational. Sometimes guilt is also fine if it is rational, and if it is kind of based on certain event that happens in your life. But if it is irrational, little bit something happened and you blow it out of proportion, then it is called as an irrational guilt. Viewing themselves as worthless, evil, ugly, and obsessing over perceived flaws in the character. So, too much focus on what is wrong with you to an irrational level. So that leads to a lot of this depression clinical depression can be kind of promoted by such kind of thought processes. So, this is an example how certain traits or patterns of thought processes could lead to certain mental disorders such as depression. So, this is a personality diathesis, which is a self criticism as a personality factors can be linked to various negative events perceived as individual's fault, can trigger symptoms of depression. Another factors which could be linked to personality is explanatory style, which we have already discussed in detail in the earlier modules. So, there can be different styles of explanation that people know explain things whatever happens in their life, particularly when something bad happens or something good happens, or sometimes people succeed in something, sometimes people fail in something. In such context, people use certain, some people have a tendency or kind of personality characteristics of explaining things in a very similar pattern all the time. So, that becomes a type of their style. Whenever they fail, they will explain things in a very particular way. Whenever they succeed, they will explain things in a very particular way. So, it is a kind of style, that means it becomes a part of their personality. So, so there can be people who are pessimistic explanatory style, which because of such style of explanation people are more likely to experience depression and other things. Some people are having optimistic explanatory styles, which may lead to much more hopeful about future and so on. So, let us see how one of the particular style of explanation, which is pessimistic explanatory style, could contribute to depression. So, this we have already discussed, but just to kind of give you a brief recap of this concept. So, this was basically explained by Martin Seligman and his colleagues, who identified that people explain events along with certain dimensions. So, whenever they try to explain certain things that happens in their life, they try to explain using factors like whether the reason is internal or external. So, this is one of the factors that generally people try to use in terms of explaining things in their life. So, one factor is internal versus external causes. So, if you see the cause is internal, that means you see the reasons for whatever happens in your life, or let us say you succeed or you fail in an event. So, the reasons lies within you. So, then it is an internal factor. When you see or explain things like that you fail in an event, you see the reason is outside of me, then it becomes an external cause. So, internal and external cause can have a different repercussion in terms of emotional experiences. So, whenever you see, let us say you failed because of internal reasons. So, for example, let us say you failed because you lack intelligence or you lack ability or you lack skill, then it is an internal factors. So, I failed because I do not have the ability to succeed in that. So, that is an internal reasons. When you say I failed because somebody was biased towards me, somebody was not fair in the evaluation of whatever I was doing, then it is an external reasons, or you can just say my luck was bad. So, these are external factors. So, sometimes people try to explain things using internal versus external causes. So, where you find the cause, that will have a implications. People also use another factor in their explanation, that is stable factors or unstable factors, which basically means how do you see the reasons for whatever happens in your life. So, let us say you fail, we are giving an example of failure in something, you failed in certain task. Now, what is the reason of this failure? If the reason is stable, that means the reason is very like more or less permanent, it is difficult to change the reason. When you say the reason is unstable, then you see the reasons could be changed. For example, when you say I failed because lack of intelligence, so it is a stable factor. Intelligence does not change on a daily basis, if you have certain level of intelligence, it can change, but it takes a lot of time. It does not happen like after 1 week your intelligence level will change, it does not happen like that. So, it is a stable cause, let us say intelligence or abilities or skills, these are stable factors, you cannot change them overnight. Unstable factor, let us say you say I failed in the event because I did not work hard. So, hard work is an unstable factor, you can change your level of hard work, you could not perform because of lack of hard work, next time you can put lot of effort in it. So, it is an unstable, so you can change the factors very easily. So, hard work is an example of an unstable factors. So, people also explain using stable and unstable factors. Another factor that people also use in their explanation is global versus specific factors. So, global factors are like if a factor whatever you are trying to use to explain the reasons, if it has a lot of impact in various aspects of your life, then it is a global factors. It has a far reaching implication. When you say generalize and far reaching implication, those factors like intelligence. So, if you explain your failure because of lack of intelligence, then you are more likely to think that I will not be able to do lot of other things because everything requires certain level of intelligence. So, if I lack intelligence, I cannot do lot of things. So, it will be a global factor. If you see specific factors or specific causes, then you see I failed in this task because this particular few aspect that I did not prepare in this particular situation was the reason. So, you are trying to find reasons only in that context, you are not finding a reasons which can impact all the aspects of your life. So, narrow and limited factors like my luck was bad at this time. So, it may be very specific cause, or you say whatever the necessary skill that was required in doing this particular task was not good enough. So, you are not so other aspect of your life is not influenced because of failure in this particular task. So, these are called specific causes. So, people who explain negative events as outcome of unchangeable and generalized causes. So, mostly pessimistic explanatory style is people who with pessimistic explanatory style, they mostly try to explain negative things in their life using internal factors. So, they mostly find fault within themselves and stable factors which cannot be changed. So, pessimistic people are generally pessimistic style include mostly internal, stable and global factors. Mostly they explain negative events using internal, stable and global factors. So, the moment you see I failed because of lack of intelligence or lack of ability, then there is not much hope in the future, So, because you cannot change that. So, it is a stable factors, it is within you. If it is outside you, things could change next time, but if it is within you and which cannot be changed and you see, then it will it has implication in lot of things that I do in my life. So, that becomes a global factor. So, such kind of explanation of failure using this, not the success. If you use success using this, the implication will be positive, but if you explain failure using internal, stable and global factors, mostly that will lead to very pessimistic style of explanation, and people with pessimistic style of explanations are more likely to explain using internal, stable and global factors, and such explanation may lead to that promote depression. So, pessimistic explanatory style is another personality factors which can contribute to depression and can interact with a particular class of stressful events, especially when negative things happens. And this explanatory style, negative things happens, they interact and can lead to depression in terms of experiences of that person. So, this is another example of how personality traits could contribute to mental disorders such as depression. There are many other personality disorders which could be contributed by certain personality characteristics or traits. Just briefly summarized here. For example, the disorder of anorexia nervosa, which is a eating disorder where people become obsessed with loss of weight, and they do very extreme fasting and they lose too much of weight, and sometimes they become malnutritious. So, that too much of obsession with the weight, and it becomes a disorder because that is not realistic. So, people with anorexia nervosa generally they become too much of lean and thin and malnutritious because of too much of obsession with the weight. So, that is called anorexia nervosa. Mostly these people, one of the personality factors that is linked to this kind of disorder is perfectionism. So, one of the traits that is associated with that, which get expressed in terms of a tendency to set extremely high performance standard of oneself and be distressed when these are not met. So, people will have certain standards of weight and so on, and if little bit of it increases, they will become completely distressed about it and they will do extreme things. So, this is a trait which could be linked to personality trait, which could be linked to a disorder which is called anorexia nervosa. Now, another personality disorder, mental disorder which could be linked to personality traits is bipolar disorder, which is a kind of a mix of depression as well as mania. So, in this case what happens, there is an extreme mood swing happens in the patient, and the mood swing kind of oscillates from mania stage to depression stage. So, person will become highly excited, too much of excited and happy in the stage of mania, to extent that everybody around them will understand this person is something is not right, too much of excitement, too much of energy and too much of doing things. So, that is the manic stage, and then after that the person will go into depression. So, depression mania, this is the cycle of bipolar disorder. Many time this disorder could also be linked to traits of hypomanic temperament. So, it is a tendency to be overly optimistic, excited and exuberant, too much of energetic, hyperactive and needing less sleep than other people. So, that could be one of the reason that personality trait which could kind of increase the vulnerability factors in the bipolar disorder. So, another mental disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. In this case the person becomes too much of obsessed with particular things. So, the person become, there is an obsessive kind of there is persistent intrusive thoughts. So, certain thoughts comes again and the person will direct their action and repetitive behavior, that is called compulsion. So, certain thoughts are repetitive and those thoughts leads to repetitive actions. So, for example, it could manifest into so many things. Some people are obsessed with, let us say, washing hands, because they think some germs will come, and this obsession become too much. After every minute they will start washing their hands because they think some germs will come. So, it becomes to the unrealistic aspect and it influences their life, because they will become too much of obsessed with, let us say, germs and washing hands in terms of actions. So, obsession compulsion, it could be in so many ways. Some people too obsessed with, let us say, closing locks, and they will see again and again whether it is locked or not, or those kind of things. Some people get obsessed with certain particular aspects in their life, and it becomes disorder because it influences their life. They cannot do other things. It influences too much on their life. So, one of the reason why such people, such kind of disorder in terms of personality is something called as a thought action fusions. So, if a thought comes, it automatically translates into actions. So, a tendency to see thoughts and actions are equivalent. So, if thought is coming, then the action will happen. So, that having a thought about a negative thing happening makes it more likely to happen. So, if they think something negative, that okay, some germs have come to my hand, so that means they will think it is a real thing. So, automatically the action will follow. So, that is called thought action fusion. So, some people have this in the personality, which could contribute to these disorders. Another is panic disorder. So, this is a disorder where people experience recurrent and unexpected panic attacks, sudden anxiety, and to the extent they will become completely immobilized and panicked, and completely to the extent that people become highly even immobile, they could not move their bodies and so on. So, that extreme kind of anxiety experiences. So, such people are very basically in terms of trait, they have high anxiety sensitivity. So, tendency to fear the physical symptoms of anxiety such as racing heartbeat and shortness of breath. So, the moment heartbeat becomes fast, they will become too conscious, and they take it as a kind of as a trigger, and they interpret it as that something very bad is going to happen, which may contribute to their panic attack and so on. So, in all this personality disorder, in all these mental disorders, certain personality trait could kind of make them more vulnerable for these disorders. So, that does not mean this psychological disorder happens only because of personality factor, there are many other reasons also, but certain personality trait makes it more vulnerable towards these disorders. So, these are examples that how personality trait could contribute to mental disorders. Now, let us see another cluster of disorder which are called as a personality disorders. So, till now we are discussing about certain mental disorders which are contributed by certain personality trait. Now, there are certain personality disorders which are disorders of personality itself. So, these are traits of persons which themselves are called as disorders. So, those are called personality disorders. So, in addition to influencing who develops particular disorders and how they express them, some personality traits can themselves be called as a disorder. These are called as personality disorders. Now, recently personality disorders have become a major topic of investigation in the clinical psychology, but they have been recognized as a form of psychological disturbance in the 18th century. So, people have been kind of people understood these disorders for a long time, but clinical psychologists have more recently they have started focusing on these disorders more seriously. So, personality disorders are like enduring, inflexible and maladaptive dispositions or characteristics that produce significant interpersonal difficulties and distress for those who have them. So, certain characteristics of the people, these are the characteristics of the people which are themselves disorders. So, like these are mostly very enduring patterns, very inflexible ways of thought processes, they do not change those thought processes, and certain maladaptive, this leads them problems in their life and conflicts in their life and produces significant difficulties, interpersonal difficulties, relationship problems and so on, and to a large extent high distress in their life. So, these are some of the common aspects to personality disorders. Now, this personality disorder is different from other mental disorders in certain ways. So, there are certain characteristics which makes them different from other mental disorders. Some important differences are listed here. One is that primary symptoms involved in the personality disorder is there is involved issues in interpersonal relationship rather than abnormalities in the personal behavior, emotions, thinking and thought process. So, there may not be any direct problems in their emotional patterns and other things, but one of the main things that get reflected in the personality disorder is that they will have lot of issues in the interpersonal relationship. So, they may not have direct abnormalities in their emotions and thought processes visibly, apparently they will look very normal, but they will have issues in the interpersonal relationships. Second is personality disorders are lasting and woven into the fabric of the person identity. So, these personality disorders are almost like this becomes a part of the identity of that person's, he is like that. So, and that characteristics or identity of that person itself is problematic in terms of adjustment with other peoples in the society and so on. So, unlike most other disorders which are mostly the characteristics could be temporary or they may be recurrently happening again and again after some time, personality characteristics is there with that person all the time. Third is personality disorders are integral to person's sense of self. They are rarely viewed by the individuals as problem to be solved. So, in the personality disorder the problem is that person looks at these characteristics as the characteristics of that person, which is true in that sense. So, basically it is a part of their self characteristics. So, they will see this is how I am. So, this is the myself, this is the my characteristics. So, they never see this is a problem, they say this is my this is myself the way I am, and they never see it as a problem. Certain behaviors they show are problematic, they do not accept that as a problem. So, generally they will never seek psychological treatment for these issues. Instead, sometimes these people often perceive others as the source of problem. They will always blame because of the others I am not able to having difficulties in my life, and because of this relationship and interpersonal issues these people may experience other psychological disorder like depression and so on, then probably they will go to seek help and other things. But their own personality disorder, the characteristics that are associated with their own self and identity, they will never question that as a problematic things. So, that is another difference from for other disorder people see these are like manifestation of certain problems and they may seek help and other thing, but in this case they will see this is the characteristics of their own self, own identity, and they may not seek help because they do not see it as a problem. So, in the DSM-5 and the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the 5th version which is the most recent version of the manual where psychological disorders are characterized or categorized in the different categories. So, they have personality disorders in the they listed different types of personality disorders, they listed different clusters or categories of personality disorders. So, the DSM-5 lists out certain types of personality disorders, and they have a different clusters of these disorders with varied characteristics. The cluster A of personality disorders personality to the manual, which is proposed by American Psychiatric Association, the different types of personality disorders. So, in the cluster A they included all those personality disorders which are which Characteristics of all these personality disorders basically includes odd and eccentric behavior. Very odd kind of behavior they will show, very eccentric kind of which are not normal. Very eccentric ways of behaving are the patterns in these clusters, all the disorders under these clusters. So, in the cluster A, it includes disorder like paranoid personality disorder. Characteristics of disorder is that people will be very show a lot of perceived distrust, they will not trust anybody, and lot of suspicions of others. They will always be suspicious about others, they will not trust people. So, this is called paranoid personality disorder. So, naturally such people will have difficulties in the relationship. If you cannot trust anybody, how do you relate with other persons? So, all the time they will think that other person is having bad intentions, they always feel like they are not telling the truth, and they will always misinterpret good action as threats. So, all the time they will find something to be suspicious about the other persons. So, that is called paranoid personality disorder. Obviously, when we say something is disorder, the symptoms are very extreme, to the extent that it creates lot of problems in their life, where things should not be looked with suspicion, they may looked with suspicion. So, too much of paranoid and lack of trust and too much of suspicions of others is the symptoms of paranoid personality disorder. Another personality disorder under this cluster is schizoid personality disorder. Here the characteristics of this people with this disorder are their kind of detachment from social relationships and limited emotional expression. Such people will not show much emotions, too much of detachment and no emotional expression. They prefer very solitude, to live alone, they lack interest in relationships and too much of emotionally cold kind of person, to the extent that it becomes a disorder. So, such people will not be able to connect with any other individuals, because complete lack of emotions. So, that is called schizoid personality disorder. Another disorder under this cluster is schizotypal personality disorder. The characteristics of this is acute discomfort in close relationship along with cognitive and perceptual distortion. Again, they have a lot of discomfort in forming close relationship. So, they generally are unable to form relationships, along with they have some cognitive and perceptual distortion. There will be problems and disturbances in the thought processes and perceptual distortion. So, they may have odd beliefs about things, they may think some magical thinking, unusual perceptual action, they may see things which may not be there, some unusual things they may see, and lot of eccentric behaviors could be there. So, these are three categories that are put under cluster A of personality disorder, and if you see all these symptoms of these disorders, these are mostly very odd and eccentric type of behavior shown by these people or people in this category. Cluster B puts all those disorders, personality disorders, where the symptoms are very dramatic. People will show very dramatic kind of behavior, very erratic behaviors. Something automatically you can find out that something is very odd about these people, very dramatic, very too much of loud behavior they will have. Among these is one is antisocial personality disorder. The characteristics of this disorder is that they will disregard for and violation of others' right. So, mostly these people will get engaged in lot of criminal activities. So, they will be deceitful, impulsive, aggressive, lack of remorse. They may do any crime and they will not see any remorse or guilt in their face. So, these people could be they do all kinds of criminal activities, they could be rapists, they could be serial killers. A lot of people in this category are mostly because antisocial, the characteristics, they will do things which are against social norms. So, individual may engage in criminal behaviors and disregard social norms. So, they have no regard for social norms, and when they do any such kind of behavior, there is not much remorse in their faces. So, antisocial personality disorder is a very very kind of very difficult disorder. So, because this person will not see this as a problem, that is the biggest problem. So, they will never seek treatment or help from other people, because they will see it is normal according to them. They will not have any remorse and any kind of thing. So, a lot of these criminal people will come under this category, antisocial personality disorder. Second is a borderline personality disorder. So, in this disorder is characterized by instability in relationship, self image, emotions. Too much of the kind of behavior where they may get involved into very intense kind of behavior, they will have issues with their self image, very vulnerable self image. So, and lot of emotional disturbances. So, it may include things like intense relationship, fear of abandonment, identity disturbance, impulsivity, self harm, mood swings. So, those are the characteristics associated with borderline personality disorder. So, too much of emotional disturbances and the problem with their self image, little bit things will disturb their self esteem will go down and so on. So, like that so mostly those kind of emotional disturbances will be characterized by this personality disorders. Another is histrionic personality disorder. It is characterized by excessive emotional and attention seeking behavior. So, these are the people who will always seek attention from other people, if they are not getting attention, they will get highly disturbed. So, they always have a desire to be center of attention, show a lot of dramatic theatrical behavior, rapidly shifting emotions. So, always they want attention from other people and which leads to a lot of dramatic behaviors they show, and their moods always shifts very quickly. So, that is called histrionic personality disorder. And the last one in this cluster is narcissistic personality disorder. Again, these people have a grandiose idea about themselves, they always have a need for admiration, they also wants to be all the time in the center of attention, they always think they are something great and they should get special attention. This is their birthright, something like that. They lack empathy, they do not understand others perspective, they always want they have to be all the time all the necessary attention and respect should be given to them. So, they have a lot of grandiose ideas about themselves which are mostly imaginary. So, a lot of arrogance comes out of this, they exploit other people. And lot of things they have a sense of entitlement, this is what I deserve and people should give me. So, these are like typical self obsessed, I am the best kind of symptom. Narcissistic personality disorder, people with this disorder have these characteristics. So, this is the personality disorder in cluster B. In cluster C includes puts different personality disorders where the symptoms are mostly related to anxiety and fear. So, this includes things like avoidant personality disorder. The symptoms of this disorder is that a lot of social inhibition, feelings of inadequacy, hypersensitivity to negative evaluation, too much of avoidant and they are not able to kind of lot of fear associated with others judgment and so on. So, they always feel lack of sense of feelings of inadequacy and become too sensitive about any negative evaluation given to them, so too much of anxiety associated with these symptoms. So, because of this people generally avoid social interactions because of too much of fear of criticism, feelings of inferiority, perceived social ineptness. So, these are some of the things that gets manifested in this people with this disorder. Another is dependent personality disorder. So, here people major characteristics are excessive need to be taken care of, leading to submissive and clinging behavior. So, some people even though they in their once they even become adolescents or adults, they still becomes too much dependent on certain individuals, like their parents and so on, excessive clinging and excessive they has to be taken care all the time. So, too much of submissing and clinging behavior. So, that can become problematic in disorders when it remains for a long time. So, generally people have difficulty in making decisions without excessive advice. So, they cannot make any decisions on their own, they always will depend on someone else. Too much of fear of abandonment, dependence on others for emotional supports. So, too much of dependence behavior, sense of autonomy is very less. So, that is called dependent personality disorder. The last one is obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which we also discussed a little bit earlier, which basically includes the people are preoccupied with orderliness, perfectionism and control. with few specific things. They always wants to be very orderly, as everything has to be under control, and they want to make it sure again and again and again. So, that is obsessive compulsive personality disorder. People become excessive devotion to work, rigidity, stubbornness, inflexibility about rules and morality. So, too rigid, if they are obsessed with something, they will be completely fixated on that. So, that is obsessive compulsive disorders. So, these are the three clusters of the different personality disorders which are listed in the DSM 5, the latest version of DSM 5. And so, this shows that there are many disorders which are the part of personality of that person, and their personality characteristics itself is disorder. So, this is how personality could be in one another way linked to the disorder. So, personality itself is a disorder in all these cases, and in many cases personality can make people vulnerable to some other mental disorders which are not personality disorder, but other mental disorders. So, this is how it is can be connected to mental health. Now, another aspect of personality disorder which is not directly listed under personality disorder, this is earlier used to be called as a multiple personality disorder. Now, it is called as dissociative identity disorder. So, it is not directly put into personality disorder, but it is put under another name called dissociative identity disorder, which was earlier called as a multiple personality disorder. So, this is disorder also we will discuss little bit here, because this also has some aspects to problems in the personality. So, this multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, although it is not directly considered under personality disorder, this dissociative identity disorder is generally categorized under dissociative disorder, which is another category of disorder in the DSM. It is associated with striking disturbance in the personality. So, this is also related to personality. So, there is a lot of disturbance in the personality itself. So, in this case, in the multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, it involves the presence of two or more distinct personalities or identities within a single individual. So, in this case what happens, a lot of the cases that were reported in this case is that people have two or more distinct personalities within one individual. So, one person will show certain characteristics, sometimes because of certain triggers this person will completely transform into another person and will show completely different characteristics. So, it may be two other, or it may be 3, 4 many other personalities could be within one individual. So, that is called multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. So, each identity or each personality that is there has its own unique characteristics of thinking, behaving and interacting, and they often have their own names, age and histories. Sometimes when the person shows another personality, it will be completely different. They may also say different names to that persons, or their behavior patterns will be completely different to the extent. So, those are like there are two individuals within the same person, or maybe more than two individuals within the same person. So, that was called as a multiple personality disorder earlier. Now, it is called as a dissociative identity disorder. So, one of the main feature of this disorder or dissociative identity disorder is the presence of memory gap. The person completely forgets the other person when a new person emerges within the person, or the individuals may not recall events or time periods when a different personality is in control. So, it is almost like another person is in charge, and their characteristics may be completely different, and when they shift to other person, they completely forget about the other person. So, there is a very important kind of memory gap. The person may not remember that he was some other person. People with dissociative identity disorder may find themselves in unfamiliar situations or location without understanding how they got there. So, some people reported that when another person took over, they completely went to some other new places, and then suddenly they came back to their original person, and they do not know how they came there, how they and all these memories are completely was not there. So, as one personality might be unaware of the actions of another persons. For example, they might wake up in an unfamiliar bed or discover unexplained financial transaction made by another personality. So, it is almost like completely another person took over and did something which they themselves, which the original person was not aware. So, in individual diagnosed with DID or dissociative identity disorder, there is a typically a primary host, the original person, primary host, and there is an alter personality who takes over sometimes. So, that is called the primary host, and then there is an alter personality. Now, this alter personality may be just one alter personality or maybe 2, 3, multiple also. So, each alter personality may have its own distinct name, age, mannerism and emotional states, and they may even differ in gender from the host personality in terms of the expression of behavior. So, these alters often emerge in response to some specific situation, particularly during time of stress, and their presence may be predicted in certain contexts. So, if people who are around them may sometimes predict, if such situation arises, the other person will take over. The host personality is generally characterized by sadness, dependence and passivity, as if he has no control over it, something else takes over. In contrast, the alter person will be much more display wide variety of behaviors such as childishness, hostility, seductiveness, other uninhibited traits. The person will be very loud in the behavior. Alters may also be critical or scornful of the host and other personalities. So, they may criticize other people and so on. So, the characteristics many times are very different. Now, while the different personalities may share general knowledge and physical skills, they differ significantly in terms of behavior. There have been reports of cases where personalities exhibited different allergies, eye prescriptions, handedness, because even handedness was also different. In one person it was maybe let us say right handed, the alter was left handed or something like that. Even menstrual cycles, even variations in the brain blood flow patterns, this illustrates the profound differences that can exist between identities within the same individuals. So, such kind of variations could have also been reported in some cases where the person was completely different in terms of the alter person was completely different from the host person. Now, this disorder has been full of controversies because of this, this situation which is for a lot of people it is unbelievable. So, there are certain controversies associated with this disorder. One is this existence of dissociative identity disorder, which was called as multiple personality disorder. It was controversial for many reasons. One was the concept of having multiple distinct identities within the single person, it completely held against the belief of the whole concept of personal identity. When we say the personal identity, we know by definition it is one person with certain characteristics. So, there is a sense of self, there is an identity of one person and the person shows certain behavior. When you say that within the same person there are 2, 3 other characteristics, it is completely goes against the belief of the whole concept of the person itself or whole concept of the personality itself. So, in Western culture, in many cultures, there is a strong emphasis on an unified sense of self as a person. So, we can know if you are a person, you will show this behavior in whatever situation you are in. So, there is a consistency in the person is by definition the concept of personality, and it completely goes against this whole idea of consistent unified personality when we talk about this multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. So, it does not completely it goes with the general belief of the people, general idea of the people. So, many people generally were not very still sees this with a doubt. Second is the history and prevalence of this disorder also leads to certain skepticism. People are not willing to accept lot of these ideas, associated with it. For example, prior to 1980s, fewer than 200 cases of this disorder, dissociative identity disorder, were documented globally. Before 1980, very few cases were reported, across the world, across the globe. However, the recent estimates suggest there are now tens and thousands of such cases, predominantly from North America. So, most of this reported now it seems are kind of increasing. Before 1980 very few cases were reported, and with the passage of time it seems that recently thousands of such cases are reported, and most of these cases are coming from North America. So, this sharp increase of this disorder apparent concentration in particularly North America or US have led some to argue that this might be a culturally bound phenomena. So, this could be, so since most of the cases are coming from US or North America, many people argue that this may have something to do with the cultural aspects of that area, because we do not see too many cases from other regions. So, critics compare it with a other culturally specific disorder such as Koro, a disorder which is prevalent in certain Asian cultures, which involves intense fear of a body part disappearing. So, this is also another culturally culture specific disorder named as Koro, which is found in certain Asian cultures, where people have a very intense fear of that certain body parts are disappearing in their body. So, this could be a very specific thing in a certain cultural context. So, they are saying, so dissociative identity disorder could be such case, it could be a very similar case where it is a culture bound thing, because most of the cases are coming from a particular region. So, this rapid rise in cases, the fact that DID is rarely reported outside North America have fueled debates about its legitimacy and the possibility of it being influenced by local culture. So, some people argue that if it is not coming from other regions of the world, so something is questionable here. Third factor is or reasons of controversy around this disorder is the skepticism and about this specific disorder is fueled by unusual, often sensational aspect associated with it. Now, as the time progressed, it became more and more sensational in terms of symptoms, in terms of number of alters. So, as the attention to disorder has increased, so has the complexity of the reported cases also increased. Initially, cases of this DID typically involve only 2 or 3 distinct identities. Initially, it was mostly 2 or maybe maximum 3 people in the same person. Later, however, more recent reports often describe an average of about 12 people alters, with some cases claiming more than even 100 also, which becomes little bit kind of difficult to believe that such things are possible. So, this led to more skepticism about this. The emergence of this highly unusual phenomena such as alters embodying, even also some people reported some alters are like animal characteristics, or patients claiming to have been subjected to extreme ritualistic abuse in their alter forms by satanic cults or aliens has further raised doubts. So, some people reported very unusual things, that some of the alters are like animals, and some alters reported that they have been abducted by aliens and some satanic cults and so on. So, they become very extreme unusual descriptions. So, these extraordinary claims and the increasing number of alters are perceived by some as indicative of fantasy, hysteria or theatrical response rather than genuine mental health conditions. So, some people questioned about it because of the kind of description they are giving. It is more maybe like fantasy of those people, or maybe some hysteric reactions or response to certain rather than genuine mental health condition. So, this trend towards increasingly bizarre and dramatic cases contributes to the perception that DID may be influenced by cultural factors and sensationalism rather than solely reflecting of clinical reality. So, there may be certain cases where there may be some truth, but it may be more related to the cultural factors, or because of the too much of sensationalism, people are kind of exaggerating it. So, that could be also some of the reasons. So, people are kind of a little bit of skeptical about this disorder, primarily because of too much of bizarre description around it. Initially, it was fine, then it became too much of bizarre and too much of cases within the same person. So, that led to people look at this disorder with lot of skepticism, but obviously it is also reported. So, it is there in that category of disorder. Now, let us see what are the causes of this personality disorder. So, personality disorder, why it happens? So, one of the reason is, so if you see in terms of statistics, approximately 10% of general populations and up to half of the psychiatric patient in clinical settings are mostly, there may be some form of personality disorder are experienced by people. So, cause basically two major causes could be attributed to this personality disorder. One is obviously genetic factors. Many times this disorder could be contributed by certain genetic vulnerabilities. So, it may run in the families. So, one is heritability, that roughly 50% of the personality disorders could be attributed to the genetic reasons or family history. So, genetic vulnerabilities can predispose individuals to develop certain personality disorders. So, it could be linked to family history and genetic factors in terms of why people in the first place have certain personality disorders. So, genetic factors also, within that comes family history. Family history of personality disorder increases the risk. That does not mean it will happen automatically to the next generation, but it increases the risk. Obviously, environmental factors could contribute to certain personality disorders. One is childhood traumatic experience, the bad events during the childhood. So, there is a significant association between a history of childhood trauma and the development of personality disorders. So, people who experience a lot of abuse and traumatic situations during their childhood, they are also more likely to develop certain personality disorder in their adulthood. So, children who experience verbal abuse, notably at higher risk of developing disorders such as borderline, narcissistic, obsessive compulsive and paranoid personality disorder in their adulthood. So, if they experience lot of abuse during the childhood, it may lead to stimulate those disorders in their adulthood. Another factor is their high reactivity. Some individuals are very high reactive, too much of sensitive to various stimuli such as light, noise and texture observed in children has been linked to certain personality disorder. This heightened reactivity may contribute to the development of some of these disorder in the later life. So, some research shows that some children who are very sensitive to light, noise, texture may lead to or kind of make them more vulnerable for certain personality disorder in their adulthood. So, overall it could be because of the genetic reasons or environmental experiences such as trauma and reactivity can play a very important role in the development, or there may be causal factors in the personality disorder. So, these are how personality could be linked to mental health and disorders. So, this is how we can kind of understand or apply personality psychology in the context of mental health. So, with this I will stop here. Thank you, and in the next class we will be looking at some other applications of personality. Thank you.